I'm here just to kind of be your couchmate here. We can pretend we're watching some reality TV out there. So why don't you share with us the mystery and the appeal of the title, the Deputy Chief of Staff for the President, Commander-in-Chief?
So I think that people who have asked me before sort of have their own impression of what it is. And there are people who think that my job was awesome because my office was about like 60 feet from the Oval Office. That actually meant very little to me. The part of my job, so what I did, I oversaw, I think I'm like reverbing. Hang on, let me move this down a little bit. Is that better? Okay. I oversaw, now think about this, I'm 5'2", I'm a woman. I oversaw the White House military office, which was about 3,000 members of the military, and is this?
I don't know, is it yours or is it mine?
How's this? This is better, okay. This is awkward, but it's fine. So, when I took, this is actually something that everyone should know. When the president asked me to become the Deputy Chief of Staff, we were in the middle of a transition. So Rahm Emanuel was leaving to run to be mayor of Chicago, and Bill Daley was coming in. And the president had asked me to be Deputy Chief of Staff, and I said, "Sir, we don't know who the Chief of Staff is gonna be, so I would feel much better if we held off on this until we figured it out and I could interview with whomever that person was going to be." Well, let me tell you, there are like not a lot of men that would have taken that course, you know? I mean, they would have been like, "I'm Deputy Chief of Staff, I'm going, I'm done." But I didn't. I wanted Bill to be as invested in my success and my participation in the West Wing, and I really thought that that was the best way to do it, and it turned out to be a pretty smart move. And so, as I became Deputy Chief, Bill was starting, Nancy Andaparle, who some of you may know as the actual like architect of the healthcare law, she became Deputy Chief of Staff for policy. And we both decided when we were talking about this that we really wanted to do it together. It would have been the first time that two women were basically in the line of succession for the government as like the two people who would run it, God forbid something happened, to the Chief of Staff. And so we were and I just don't think that this would have, we literally sat down, I said, "Nancy Ann, here's what I think my job is, here's what I think your job is. Does that make sense to you?" And she said, "Yes, it makes sense to me." And I said, "Well, there are some gray areas where I might be, you know, like where both of us could be in charge." And she said, "Well, we'll just talk about it when the time comes." And God is my witness, that is what we did for 2 years. The two of us, no territory, we were not territorial, no fighting. We were the greatest team that ever was. And it made those first years of learning what my new job was really incredible. And I think that the word is I just kind of felt safe. Like I knew Nancy Ann had my back, I had her back. And so she handled all policy matters. We split some foreign policy issues. So she did some of the like more policy-weighted stuff. I oversaw all the president's foreign trips. The White House military office, which sounds like, oh, what does the military office do? Well, they run Camp David. They oversee the operations of Air Force One, Marine One, and all the acquisition programs that are sort of related to those, so kind of a big deal. Presidential appointments, scheduling in advance. Oval Office operations, so the team that works outside of the Oval Office, they reported to me. And I know I'm forgetting something, but that's like the gist sort of what it was. And what some people loved that I had like tons of decision-making power and basically that they just saw me as like a powerful person, because in DC people like really care about that. But I loved it because I had like the largest team on the planet. I mean, there were like about 1,700 EOP personnel that were like related, somehow had to deal with me in some way or another. And then the military office. And so what I loved was knowing that in one way or another, and the way that I actually felt powerful and what I felt like my legacy was when I left, was that I like made the campus a better place. That's what we call the White House. Call it the 18 acres or the campus. And I cared about, you know, have we done everything we can? I mean, this is kind of funny, but I was the first person to put like a feminine product disposal system in the West Wing. Like, that sounds crazy, but when you're busy, like, you don't want to run to CVS or worse, send your assistant. That gets so awkward. But, because my assistants were always dudes. But so I felt really strongly that, like, leaving that place better than we found it for whomever were to come next was really important. And so that's actually why I feel like my job was great, because I kind of cared a lot about the things that nobody even knows happen. And so that's not super sexy, and a lot of, but.
So Alyssa, you didn't just wake up or graduate from high school in Rhinebeck, New York, graduating of 72, and say, when I grow up, I'm gonna work at the White House.
No.
So walk us through what that was like, making a college change, the moment between Iowa and Chicago, and those decision-making points.
Okay. So, no, I did think that politics was really interesting growing up. I mean, in '92, when Bill Clinton became president, I was in 10th grade and tried to find like every way possible to get down to DC and see him be sworn in. And my parents kind of like gave me enough rope to hang myself. They're like, good luck, Alyssa, try to figure out a plan. But all the hotel rooms were gone, so I couldn't go. But I was always very into language. When you grow up in a town, I think that Rhinebeck may really technically only have like 3,000 residents, and my school had 70 people, and so we didn't have as many options as some people at larger schools would have. And so I took French, and I loved it, and my father would quiz me every morning. Like, you'd eat breakfast, and he'd say, what's on the table? And one of the funny things is my younger sister was coming down the stairs. She was pretty young, and my dad pointed at a grapefruit, and he said, what's that? And I said, pamplemousse. And my sister did not understand what was happening, and she said, I'm not a plump little moose. And so, but the best part is that when she went to college, like 15 years later, when you fill out the form and it says, what's your name and what do you prefer to be called, she is still Moose Mastromonaco. I mean, to this day because of that. But I loved language. I said, this is what I'm going to do. And in Rhinebeck, and the way that my parents were, it was kind of like figure out your own journey. Like, whatever you want to do, if you're going to be successful and happy, then so be it. And so I went through. My parents said, well, where are you going to go to college? And I was explaining earlier to a smaller group that in 1993, there was no internet, there was no downloading applications. I had to fill out the postcard and send it to the school and hope that they sent me the thing back and keep track of all of this in a very complicated spreadsheet that I made up. But when the time came and they said, okay, well, here's where you got in, and something that I always enjoy telling folks at events like this is that I got rejected by every Ivy League school, and when I left the White House, they were among some of the first to call and ask if I would like to speak. I said, thank you, but no. In '94, you rejected me, now it's not. I cannot help that the University of Vermont and Wisconsin saw something in me that not any of the other private schools did. But, the thing that I think helped really shape me was that my parents said, okay, well, here, Alyssa, go ahead and do it. Write your essays, study for the SATs. They took me to Barnes & Noble, and I bought the books with my babysitting money. They gave me the number 2 pencil, I filled out the applications. And when the time came, I was very lucky, and they paid for me to go to school, but I had done all of the work myself. There was the obligatory FAFSA loan that they made me take out to teach me responsibility. But when it came time, when I had been at Vermont, I was a French major, and they were actually at that time, and I don't know if it's true now, they were phasing out French as a major. So I was like, oh my God, the sky is falling, I'm not going to be a French major. And so I actually was transferring to Wisconsin to become a French major. And it was happenstance that I got an internship working for Bernie Sanders. That last summer I was in Burlington, and it completely changed my life. The person who hired me to be an intern, his name was Phil Frumonte. I literally thought he was the bee's knees. I'm like, he's the smartest person I will ever meet in my whole life. And I am still 20 years later in touch with him. And because he taught me that when we were in that first sort of formal setting, he taught me how to interview, you know, like, I mean, it was the first real interview I've been on. He taught me, like, how to interview, and then he gave me responsibility, and I did a good job, and he gave me more. And I always tell young people who would come, in the West Wing, I had a pretty open door policy. And I'd get these young kids who came in, and they're like, well, I'm 35, I want to be you, so how do I do that? And I was like, well, with that attitude, you will never be me. Like, there's no, you know, like, why do you want to be me? Because you want to, like, fly on the moon with the president, or because you want to help people? And so, that attitude that I identified in many of the younger people was never anything, it wasn't something I really encountered in college. And so I felt like everyone there was trying to become a smarter, better, more interesting person, and I'm glad that I let that be the case, and that I wasn't too, I will say, looking back, I was more obsessed than I should have been with really doing well and being concerned about what happened when I left college. But we were talking earlier, and I wish that I had enjoyed college a little bit more. You know, I think it's kind of like wasted on young people. You know, we should all get to go back and go to college and, like, actually enjoy it and make sure we take all the classes that are, like, actually interesting. But I graduated. My dad said, okay, I'm glad you had a wonderful time in Madison. Where's the credit card? And I gave the credit card back after going to the grocery store and buying a summer's worth of groceries. And he said, you have 2 months to find a job. And I tried really hard to find a job in politics, couldn't find it, became a paralegal in New York City. And I thought to myself, like, I'm 22, I was like living that movie St. Elmo's Fire in my head. I'm like, I'm adrift, I have no plan, I'm 22. And what it ended up being the case is that being that paralegal was like one of the best experiences I ever could have had. I had responsibility, I had to work in a professional environment, I had to answer to superiors. I learned how to work with coworkers, which sounds kind of simple, but not a lot of the kids who I have seen in the past couple of years have actually had those experiences. And so now I look back and I realize how valuable it was that when, you know, my ass was on the line and I was about to get in a lot of trouble with partners for literally messing up a 52 property transaction, which had like 10,000 documents. If those kids, my fellow paralegals we hadn't been a team, I would have been sunk, but they all got in there and it was like a team effort. And so that's always something that I've like remembered kind of growing up. But as we like fast forward through my 20s where I had a series of very strange jobs, I finally realized, I'm like, what am I doing? I really want to do poli-sci. I loved being an intern for Bernie. I did such a good job. They invited me to Washington the following summer to be an intern there. And I was like, that's what I loved. That's what I should do. And so I wrote a letter. A couple of my girlfriends had moved to Boston, and I knew that I could afford to live there with them. And so I wrote a mission statement, like a Jerry Maguire mission statement, to their intern coordinator. And I said, look, this is what I went to school for, this is what I want to do, like, please give me a chance. And they did. And I moved to Boston like 2 months later, and I worked for John Kerry on and off for like 8-10 years. And because of my experience and my time with John Kerry, when we lost the presidential, which is how I know my dear friend of 10 years, Elizabeth Heyer, who's sitting right over there, when we lost, it was the relationship I had developed with Robert Gibbs, who many of you know went on to be White House press secretary. He'd worked for the Obama campaign, the Senate race in '04, and for some of you old enough to remember this, my IM window went up, and it was Roberto Gibbs, which was his screen name, and he said, Elizabeth remembers, and he said, do you need a job? I said, I do need a job. And I went in and I interviewed with then Senator-elect Barack Obama, and I worked for him for the next 10, is that right? Like almost 10 years. And so that's really how it happened. And the journey there was really just about like making relationships and keeping up with them and being a nice person that people wanted to work with. And people, like, there's nothing better than when you're in a room of people and someone brings up someone's name and they're like, I love her. Because like, you know that there are young people who I have worked with over the years, and I always tell them, I'll be like, you know, your name came up today, and so said, I love them. And it sounds kind of simple, But it means so much when you think that like someone thinks you've done a good job, like a good job at your job. You know, not just that you're like a nice person or she's like fun to go to the movies with. But I always tried to tell people when, you know, when a little birdie had said something really nice about them.
I mentioned earlier, I think we're going to switch out your mic.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah.
This is fine?
I know, but we're getting by. We make it work.
I'm
Whatever you give us.
Yeah, I'm fine with this. This is fine. Yeah.
Oh, they're saying no, they need it. Okay. The people have spoken, Alyssa. There was a vote. Well, as you do that, some of what we were talking about was the ability, and what are the transferable skills through life, right? As I joked, you didn't just wake up and say, I'm going to go work at the White House when I grow up. And, you know, it's the whole pass it on. You speak a lot about work ethic. Work hard, be kind. That is a value that many of us in this room follow. And some of that is, how do you pass it on? And you mentioned earlier a few of the pass it on expectations that have been given to you, but talk a little bit about just even making good judgment. And so if one, when they were younger, didn't have the opportunity to play in a team or have the parental guidance that you had of own your own failures so you can own your own success, let's say they have good instincts and good judgment going for them, can any of those skills be practiced and honed?
I think so. I mean, I think that, so for me, I feel like my good judgment started when I was in high school. And I was lucky because I wasn't really afraid to fail, right? And so part of making judgments and trusting your gut is having confidence, because you have to be confident enough to say, this is what I'm doing, or this is what I believe. And you know, sometimes you're going to be wrong. And I think that in that for the years, like my, you know, like high school up through when I was 30, I guess a little before I turned 30, you know, I took jobs. I made mistakes. I took bad jobs. You know, I took a job because everyone else was taking that job. After I was a paralegal, everyone and their brother was going to work at investment banks, right? And I felt like the train was leaving the station. I'm like, I have to do this. And I went and I, of course, got a job. And I walked in and I looked around. I thought I was going to throw up. I'm like, what have I done? I'm like, this is a huge mistake. Now, I knew it was a huge mistake. I had two choices. I could have stayed because I had taken the job, and that's what you should do. Or you could walk out because you knew you made a mistake and it was going to impact you. I walked out. You know, I didn't have any money, but I knew I'd made a mistake. And so I think that, and guess what? It was fine. I found another job. Like, that's the worst thing, I think, especially when you're talking about good judgment as it relates to work and trusting your gut. What is the worst thing that can happen if you go out on a limb? You get fired. Most of us could find another job. And you know, like for me, I said, I worked at a grocery store before. If I had to work at one again, instead of going to a job I hated every day, and like I still had my integrity, then so be it. And I think that because I've always been a little unafraid in that way. Now younger, I would say I'm probably a little bit more afraid now because risk-taking gets harder as you get older, I think. But I think that the more that people are forced to practice and listen to their gut, like I had friends in high school whose parents told them whether they were going to go to college, whose parents said, you should really be a doctor. And I think that it's harder to develop your judgment and your intuition when people aren't forcing you to make your own decisions. And so I think that like all of a sudden you get out of college and you haven't had to really make any decisions on your own. I think it's almost paralyzing. Like you're like, oh my God, like I'm in a new city, I have to get a job, like what am I gonna do? And that for me, the transition from high school to college was much harder than in college to the real world. I was pretty okay for that transition.
I think you're pretty okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
So we'll talk about those transitions too. We talked earlier about transitions in high school, and anybody remember, we talked, if you were at a Women's Fund event 2 months ago, I talked about the awkward middle school times. Anybody ever have those revisiting moments of when you are a freshman on campus, or you take a new job, or you relocate, and self-esteem peaks by age 9 for girls, but there's a whole report and book out now about the confidence gap in women. So what are, having self-awareness to get through those rocky times of confidence, what have been your go-to coping mechanisms, your safe places?
So I think when I went to college, when I was 18, I went to the University of Vermont. I mean, I was kind of a wreck. Like I I could not have been more like a fish out of water. I mean, I really was not fully prepared for what being, you know, number 10 in a class of 70 felt like when you went to a school with a couple thousand people. And for me, it was music. You know, I was really, really into music in high school, and I said to myself, someone here has to like Fish and God Street Wine and the Grateful Dead. And so I found people who liked the same things, and I got to know them, and I started feeling a little bit better. But then I was telling a story earlier that, you know, now I think it's actually harder for kids because of all the technology. We didn't have cable. We didn't really have televisions in our rooms at the University of Vermont. Like, we had TV, but you got ABC and NBC, and that was about it. And so there was this new television program called My So-Called Life, and it was, hello, it was an incredible show. And one of the greatest things about it is that you could only watch it in the rec room. And so it is actually how we became friends, because there was like consensus, like there isn't really consensus TV now, like one show that everybody watches. And so we would all get together, and in the beginning, you'd sit there and you'd say, oh, hey, Erica, how are you? Hey, Maggie, how was hockey practice? And by the end, you know, you'd see each other on campus, and you'd high five, you'd be like, see you later, see you for my so-called life. And I was joking that like 2 years ago, I was with David Plouffe, and he saw Jared Leto, who actually played Jordan Catalano in the show, and he punked me and had someone go over and tell Jared Leto the story of how I got friends in college was because of him. And I had a very precious moment with him. It was very nice. But that was the one, so television helped. I know that doesn't make me sound very intelligent, but it's true. And music, and finding like a common ground, and at work, and through my years of transition, I always try to find something other than work that I have in common with people, so that you're not, you know, like when we were at the White House, oh my God, we'd go out to dinner together and we'd talk about work. We'd like want to kill ourselves by the end of the day. We're like, there has to be more to our lives than work. There has to be. And so I've always really tried to find something, whether it's, you know, the friend at work I had that I love to do Pilates with, the friend who I'd go see concerts with, and that to sort of make it more personal and have a bond that was just beyond. Like if you have a work conflict with someone, you have to have something to resolve. Like you need to have something a little bit deeper, to know the person a little bit more than just like your work relationship, so that when you get pissed off, they're like, you know what? She loves the dead, it's okay. Like I know she's a good person in her heart, even though she's being like awful right now. And so I think those are sort of the mechanisms that I've used to sort of build bridges and feel a little more confident.
So let's use that, your extracurricular activities, if you will, in this transition time before you contemplate what the next big decision is. And right now, with your work and being contributing editor to Marie Claire, one of your first written articles after leaving the White House and being a contributing editor was talking about women and leadership being authentic, and can you split time between reading The Economist and watching your fingernail polish dry?
Yeah.
Is that even possible for somebody to have women's leadership capabilities and put your high heels on at the same time and mascara?
It's crazy that so basically there's this woman whose name I will not even repeat because she doesn't deserve it. But she wrote this article attacking me for going to work at Marie Claire. It basically said I was like betraying feminism, and that like clearly I had accomplished so much by working in the White House, and here I was kind of just flaming out, right? And her theory was that, you know, you have to be kind of like, that I had achieved this status, and so I should continue being sort of like dude-like, because she knew nothing about me. To, you know, on the outside, and on like, as I left the White House, that I was really just kind of like pissing away everything I had done. And what she didn't know about me, and that everyone in the White House did know about me, is that I never pretended to be anybody that I wasn't. You know, when the guys would be like sitting around talking about ESPN, guess what? I talked about last night's episode of Mindy Project, because after working all day, all I cared about, my one awesome friend that I made while working in the White House is Mindy Kaling. She's incredible, someone, but that I'm not. And so I think that that's such important advice to pass on to women, because like succeeding and being confident, you're not going to be confident in a meeting if you're not being yourself. And if you are doing something where you don't feel like you can be yourself, you are doing the wrong thing. You know, like that's just, it's true. And I was telling a story earlier that, you know, when we first got to the White House, of course, I mean, it is a big transition to go from like working with a lot of kids and wearing jeans and, you know, being in a campaign environment. It's very different, and then you're suddenly in the White House. And the people who want to try and put you in like a basket, you know, and just make you feel a certain way. Well, we would be in these meetings, and in the Roosevelt Room in the West Wing, it's where all of the sort of big meetings happen, and there's usually people gravitate towards like the same seat. It's not assigned seating, but yours kind of. And so somehow in the meeting, I always sat next to Larry Summers and Tim Geithner, okay? I could not tell you less about the economy if I tried. I mean, back then, in 2009, I was still learning so much. There was so much catch up, and I was so anxious all the time that I would ask a stupid question or not know something that was really obvious. And so I would take a list of notes. I would take notes during the meetings of things that I would go check and research myself so I didn't look stupid in front of all these guys. So lo and behold, I'm sitting next to Larry. At the end of the meeting, I do not know that he has read all of the notes on my notebook. And he says, and this is what I think is so incredible, because people are out there, they will say terrible, like that Larry doesn't like women, he says terrible things. Larry said to me, he called me up to his office and he said, Alyssa, if you ever have a question, you just come up and ask me. And he sat there and he answered all the questions on my notebook, and he said, nobody, and I said, Larry, thank you so much, like I was just feeling so nervous. And he said, Alyssa, nobody in that room knows the answers to those questions you wrote down. He's like, you're so hard on yourself, like how could this is what we're talking about and we're all trying to figure out. But I was so self-conscious that after he did that, I really looked at life very differently. And when I sort of rose through the ranks and had been there longer and you'd see new people, I would like pass them, you know, like notes about what things meant. Because there's also like a whole lingo in the White House that you don't know until you get there. And so I tried for like all the discomfort I had in the beginning. I tried to like make it more comfortable for new people as much as I could, so that they didn't have that same sort of, you know, like for what Larry did for me, I try to pass on to other people, because that was like such a nice thing for him to do.
For somebody, you had shared earlier as well that if we were to do exit interviews with everyone that worked at the White House during this administration, there would be you and one other woman who would probably rank at the top of the list for best boss, favorite boss, learned the most lessons from. What do you attribute that to? And can that be recreated in others before they become managers?
Not to toot my own horn. No, but the other woman who I always speak so highly of is one of my best friends, Kathy Brumler. Many of you saw her in the newspaper. She decided that she didn't want to be Attorney General, which is too bad. But Kathy and I were very like-minded. We were both like pretty much the same age. We had both had like relative success early in our lives, and both of us would say, so I don't, whether or not you know, but Kathy delivered the closing arguments in the Enron case. She was 35 years old. And when she did this, which was incredible, and she blows my mind. What the reporters wrote about her were her shoes. That's what they wrote. Now look, and you know when you look at the shoes, because I told her when she's done some of these kind of talks herself, I'm like, girl, you gotta bring the shoes. Because they're not even that crazy. They were like pink kitten heel shoes. But that's what they wrote about Kathy. And so we had talked about this, and I said, you know, the one thing that the two of us both did is that you can't, if you hire people and you trust them, you've got to trust them. And you've got to give them a job and send them out to do it. And if they fail, they'll have to, you know, like you don't like send them with no net at all. But people I found, and I think she found, and how we both sort of managed, is that you have to give people the room to fail or succeed on their own. And I know that for me, the biggest example of this is David Plouffe. David Plouffe, probably the greatest boss, one of the greatest bosses I'll ever have. he basically, we called it the Highwire. He's like, you're not living on the Highwire every day. Then I'm like, what are you doing? And when things would get kind of like not awesome, like when we lost in Ohio and Texas in 2008, he's like, we've got to get back on the Highwire. You know, like there's something missing, we've got to get back on the Highwire. And so I think that I always tried to keep the people who worked for me on the Highwire because it is so gratifying. Like, you'll never feel, if you're coddled, you'll never really fail, but you'll never really succeed. Like, you'll never know that you totally did it on your own. And I think that what Pluff did was that he set me out there, and I had to do it on my own, and I did it. And so when I was in the campaign, and then when we were in the White House, you know, the first time we were going to Iraq, which is a whole, I mean, it's a crazy, Elizabeth knows, it's like a crazy thing. You have to take a president or vice president into a war zone. I picked 3 kids who worked for me, and I was like, okay, you're gonna do this. And they were like, but what do we do? I was like, I don't know, I guess you're gonna figure it out. And guess what? They did. You know, it made them use judgment and trust their gut. And they came to me and they said, Alyssa, this is the plan. I was like, well, that looks like the right plan to me. And if it had been the wrong plan, I would not have let them go forward with it. But, you know, but they came up, and that they didn't have, so when they got on their planes and they went to Kabul, they were like, whoa, like, we're doing this. It wasn't like Alyssa gave us a roadmap and now we're gonna go execute it. There's like so much pride of ownership that I just think it's really empowering and like really helps people grow.
So as you prepare for a next transition, and many people I'm sure in this room have either just gone through a transition in their workplace or will be, or some may be thinking about retiring, but no woman ever actually retires, right? We continue to work on projects. What is the criteria that you are using to make the decision of what's next?
Okay.
How will you know that it's a high wire position? How will you know that it's one none of your name and lights, but it provides you that fulfillment?
So you've got to be scared. You know, most of the job offers that I had received that I chose not to take, when I really thought about them, I was like, nah. And a lot of people say, well, you worked in the White House, you know, nothing's going to compare. That's not true. There are so many different experiences that exist out there that, you know, the White House is an incredible experience, but it is a finite experience. And people who don't realize that, you know, kind of get caught up in their own head a little bit. And so when I finally left and slept a little and, you know, like called my parents, checked in, I really started looking at things and nothing was right and nothing was right. And so I found something I think is going to be right. And I know that because I was like, called Kathy. I was like, my God, girl, do you think I should do this? I'm freaking out. This is so scary. I know nothing about this. And she said, well, then there you go. So stay tuned. I'll be able to talk about it in like a week or 2. But
you can keep talking about it. It's the 5-minute warning, which means put your thoughts together. What questions do you have? There's a microphone in that aisle and that aisle. So you can start taking the microphone now. Did I cut you off mid-story?
No, that was it. That was really, I just was looking for something that, so here's what I would tell all of the kids that would come see me. What do you like to do? What are you good at doing? And what do you hate? And like, it sounds kind of very simple, but there are a lot of things I'm really good at that I cannot stand doing. And so just because I'm good at them does not mean I should ever do them again. And so I did look at that and say, because there were some job offers that I got, and I was like, God, I'm really good at that, but I hate going to work every day. So that's sort of a problem. But I wanted to do something where there would be young people around, because I do think that I've learned about myself that I get a lot of energy from having young people around, and I think that new ideas. And I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I was a disaster on Twitter for the first 2 months. I had no idea what I was doing. I tweeted some crazy things, not like inappropriate things, just like exclamation points by accident. Because I didn't know how to use it. And so finally my assistant, who had been my assistant for 2 years in the White House, called me. He's like, "So Liz, how's it going on Twitter?" I was like, "Shut up." And so he helped me. He helped get my act together. But I think that it's really, for me personally, at this stage in my life, I think I have something risky left in me. I think that I have one more like adventure. And something with young people where, you know, you're still sort of like feeling really engaged. Those are my criteria.
That makes sense. Great. Where you can have influence, right?
Yeah. Some influence is good.
Yeah.
I mean, it's hard to have influence and then not have any.
Right. We got you. Question number 1.
Hi, this is loud. I'm Vivia, and my question is sort of 2 parts. So I read this really good quote that women have to walk this sort of impossible tightrope between seeming confident and being nice to everyone.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess the first part is, how did you manage to walk that tightrope? Did you walk the tightrope?
Mm-hmm.
And then secondly, you touched on this somewhat in terms of like some of the experiences you faced being a woman in sort of a male-dominated atmosphere, and how did you deal with, if you had any, experiences where people were like, well, you're a woman, you can't do this, or some of the experiences you faced and how you dealt with them?
So it's interesting. So one, there's a little bit of a tightrope. No, stay. And we've been talking about this throughout today. I think Washington is a little bit of a different beast than some other places because I sort of experienced more ageism in Washington than I would say experienced sexism. And so for me, and you know, truth told, President Obama is not that old. So even people who were his contemporaries were only like 10 years older than I was. So it was interesting even still that there was like ageism. But we were joking that, you know, for me, I just decided that I was always just gonna be myself. And if that was like too feminine and made people uncomfortable, then so be it. The one person I can tell you it never made uncomfortable was Barack Obama. Because nobody got a bigger chuckle out of, like, you know, the guys would be talking about sports and I would pull out my Us Weekly. Guess what? That was totally fine with him. He thought it was hilarious because it's not like I was being less intellectual. It's like we were all just being ourselves, and that's actually what made us really a great team, I thought, is that you didn't have a lot of like, well, there's no good word for it, like posers, you know? So I didn't have too much of a problem with that. But what was your second question?
I think that was the second part. The first part was like the tightrope, and in terms of like managing people and doing your job, but also like women need to be nice to everyone.
Yes.
Like, the perception.
So first, I just think that people generally should be more kind and civil. And I think that the one thing that was pretty great for me in the White House is that, you know, if any of you remember some of the first things that Barack Obama said on the campaign in 2007, it's that you can disagree without being disagreeable. And so for me, it was never really, you know, I could be, if someone messed with me, I could be as big an asshole as any person you've ever met, but that was never my default mode, you know, and I never really met anyone for whom that was like their default mode in the White House. And so I think that the women that I knew being nice and being respected in the White House was never an issue.
Thank you.
You bet.
Renee Delane has a question.
Hi, Renee Delane from Women Who Dare. Oops, I keep getting shorter. I have 2 questions actually. One is, if you could choose a man and then a woman as well from history, and it could be recent history, that you would like to have an hour with to speak with, who would you choose?
Oh my God.
And the second one, God? You would choose God? Okay, and then the next question would be, do you have a favorite inspirational quote?
Okay, so the quotes I like aren't that inspirational. They're more, so I'll get to the quote in a second. But so for a woman, this is something I actually thought about recently, Geraldine Ferraro. So I don't know if any of you have seen the documentary that came out, I think in the last year, paving the way, it's incredible. And like the stuff that she had to go through, but also the grace in so many ways that the Bushes, like how they interacted, it was really, really incredible. And she was just such a pioneer that I would love to talk to Geraldine Ferraro. A man, I have to tell you, there are not that many springing to mind right now. I mean, I guess.
Would Lincoln work?
Lincoln is a great one. I'm sure he would have a lot of things to impart, and that would be terrific. And so my quote, and this is, Elizabeth will remember this, is that when we were in, like really the depths of despair on the Obama campaign, like we had some rough months there in '07, and the television show Friday Night Lights had really come, like, it was like its heyday, and so we would say clear eyes, full hearts can't lose. That was our quote, and it was on like our wall and everything, so that would be my quote.
Thank you, it's been a slice of heaven.
Thank you.
I'm significantly tall.
You tall people.
My name's Sarah Rachel. My question was about ageism, actually, you were talking about. So West Virginia House of Delegates just just elected their first 18-year-old into the House of Delegates. And my question is that too young to start getting involved in politics at that level, or just would you say go for it?
See, I would say go for it. Like, if she's a disaster, then we'll find out. You know, that like, it's not, you know, that there are certain, like, the lessons I've told you guys that I learned from 18 to like 25, when I was kind of finding my way. I personally don't think that I would have been ready to govern at 18, but I mean, good for her, you know? I mean, we'll see how it turns out, I guess.
And then I have a follow-up to that. So besides public office, how do you feel about, you know, reaching beyond like an internship and really trying to get into the heart of politics even at a young age?
So what I would say, is this about you?
Anyone in general, not just me.
Okay, so what I would say is think about a couple of things. Is there an issue that you're really passionate about? Because there are different ways to be part of politics and government. First, separating out politics and government. Is it government you're interested in, or is it politics you're interested in? If it's government, think about the things that really interest you. So a couple weeks ago, I was at the University of Vermont, I got a similar question, and I literally gave them a worksheet that's like, okay, what are you interested in? Well, I like languages. Okay, well, I'm into aid. Well, check USAID, check the Peace Corps. You know, like issue areas like that are interesting, and apply there. And it's super easy to find on the websites, actually, is internship information at the USAID.gov websites. So that's one thing. That's government. For politics, it's really thinking about what are you most interested in. Do you want to be a spokesperson? Do you just want to like learn about a campaign? Are you interested in like dealing with the press? And really just go and start as a volunteer, because you don't have a lot of responsibility. If you hate it, you can never go back. No one will ever know. But you know, really go and volunteer, because I will tell you, we had so many volunteers. Kate Berner. Kate was my intern on the Obama campaign. She was a volunteer. She was at the University of Chicago. She was a volunteer. I was like, this Kate Berner is good. And then I made her my intern, and then we hired her in the White House as an intern, and then when she finally graduated, we hired her full-time at a staff position, and she started out as a volunteer, and it's because she was just awesome. She had a great attitude. She showed up every day. You like wanted to be around her. When I was like little Kate, when some of you may remember Barack Obama took a trip to the Middle East sometime in the summer of 2008, which was a real feat. But little Kate was in charge of programming all the cell phones. And I was like, God love her if she can do this. And it was like 36 hours later, I hear her chasing, and a volunteer basically, chasing David Axelrod down the hallway, saying, Ax, I've got to show you how I've programmed your phone. And I went down to the area where we sat, and she had 3 boxes of cell phones, because again, this was like long enough ago that you couldn't just hit a button and program it. She had to do it manually. 3 boxes of phones. Now, there are a lot of kids that would have walked out and been like, this is beneath me. Little Kate did it. She did it perfectly, and now she works for the vice president. So that's why I say, go, try it out, do something with no commitment, and then if you like it, prove yourself, get an internship, and who knows, you'll see all the things. When I was an intern, I made fundraising services in the actual congressional office, and then I volunteered at the campaign at night. And so I really just tried out a little bit of everything to see what I thought was the most interesting.
Great, thank you so much.
You bet.
Go over to mic number 2 for someone who was waiting.
Hi, my name is Kate Looswigan. I'm a current student at the Glen School, and I, along with many others in the room, I'm sure, may be interested in running for public office someday.
Yeah.
And you have experience in campaigning, in governance. What advice would you give women who are interested in doing that? I know you've mostly worked for male candidates, but what have you seen that would be a piece of advice that you could give to women who are interested in running?
So I would say start getting involved now so it's comfortable to you. You know, so you kind of get a sense for what it would be like. Seeing other people, I mean, I did not run for president, but I have a pretty good idea of what it was like. It's like not fun, but so I would get exposure to it and see if, you know, like a lot of us see things have gotten a lot more negative. Like I know personally, I couldn't handle having someone attack me. Like I would lose it. I would cry every day. Like and I'm like pretty tough, you know, and I don't know that I could take people, or like knowing that my parents are hearing the things that people are saying. And I know that for male candidates I've worked for too, those things were problematic. But I would say get involved now, see what interests you, and really find a passion, like have a reason for running. Like I think that all of our candidates now, honestly, are like running to run, and no one really has like a mission, and you can't really feel that they're like yearning to like engage in public service. It feels like this rite of passage or some sort of like weird entitlement that, you know, well, of course I can be a senator. Well, why should you be a senator? And people don't answer that question enough, I don't think. So I think that you should really have a great reason for doing it, so you're passionate and you can like get up every day even when it sucks and just like want to do it. And then also the interesting thing that women candidates face the most is difficulty fundraising. Women do not like to ask for money on behalf of themselves. And so get comfortable raising money, because you'd be surprised. At Marie Claire, we asked female candidates this. We did a piece with 10 women, and I think almost all of them said that raising money was the part they liked the least about running. You bet.
Yeah, 2 more questions over
Now
there.
it's the old broad that comes up to the Thank you. My name is Xenia, and number one, I'm a public employee, so thank you for serving, because
Thank you.
I think some people don't recognize that role as being an important one to fill.
Thank you.
You made a comment about Geraldine Ferraro. There's a wonderful PBS program that just aired recently called The Makers, about women in politics, and it was marvelous, marvelous. As I'm sitting here listening to this, and you're talking about your friend and how you have conversation and all the discourse and problems in Washington, I'm wondering if we got more women involved in talking to each other in Washington, D.C., if we would be able to solve all the problems that are occurring in our nation's capital. Can you comment?
So I think yes. I do think, I do think that women have a very different take on problem solving in a lot of ways than men do. And I don't know if it's that you kind of all understand. So here's a great example. During Hurricane Sandy, mostly women were there, left in the West Wing, to sort of handle the crisis that was Hurricane Sandy. And I would like to note that when people write all these articles about Barack Obama and how he can't handle crisis, they never talk about Sandy. They never talk about Sandy. And the thing is that they give us no credit for it, because I guess cool enough people weren't handling the problem or something, because it was just us ladies in the West Wing being like, oh my God, they're like floating away in New Jersey, what are we gonna do? And the truth is that we all got together, and it was people like Jen Palmieri, and Jen Palmieri and Amy Brundage and me, and like the whole team at FEMA and Janet Napolitano, and we were like, this is completely unprecedented, what are we gonna do? And we're like, you just have to go for it. And you know, there are decisions that I made during that time that if someone had decided they were the wrong decisions, I could have been fired for. like straight up. You know, I bought refined fuel in the hundreds of millions of dollars. I moved trucks across the country with C-17s. You know, I called governors and told them to waive labor laws in their states to get, I mean, we disbanded treaties that had been around since the 1890s to get things into the Port of New York. You know, and so, but all of us had each other's backs. You know, like when we were sitting there, I was like, guys, I think we have to do this. Like, do you guys agree? And they said yes. And I knew the minute that everybody said yes, that if the ship went down, we were all going down. They weren't going to point their finger at me and be like, that was Alyssa's idea. And so that was like an incredible moment for us because it was so smooth. You know, like when there were emails about, you know, because they were coming in fast and furious, because remember, this all happened like 5 days before the election. When there were emails coming in and I was on the phone, someone would reply back and be like, Alyssa, I've got it, here's what we're gonna do. And it was like the greatest team building, like, it was one of the greatest moments, I think, of like the presidency for me. And I knew the whole time that, I mean, someone could decide that I did the wrong thing and I'd go down and that would be fine because we did it together and it was a great experience. And the way that we made decisions was so different. And there was one moment when we were in the Situation Room and we were getting briefed by the folks at FEMA and DHS and DOE on like the massive power outages. And I kept thinking to myself, I'm like, has anyone done a PSA? And like, how simple is that, right? And so I'm sitting there, and this was such a lesson, and I always tell the story because it's so important. And I'm with Craig Fugate, who is the FEMA administrator, and all of these people who are like disaster experts. And I sat there and I said, Alyssa, are you going to say it or you're not going to say it? This is like a master of the obvious of observation, Alyssa. Like, you know, I'm sure they've done it. And so I said, people don't have TVs and their phones aren't working, and the only thing people really have are radios. Have we thought about having the First Lady record a PSA? Alyssa, that's a great idea. I was like, what? Like, oh my God, I spent 10 minutes hemming and hawing about whether or not I was going to say something. And from that, we got Rupert Murdoch to use the big billboards in Times Square to put up information on how people could get housing and contact FEMA so that when all the morning shows were going live, people would see that information. We got hotels to donate those screens that you see when you walk in that say, like, you know, such and such conference. Right, well, we got them to put FEMA information about how people could register and how they could get help. And so, like, what I was, like, scared to say, my stupid question, spurred this whole thing. And when we were done, Paul, Mary, and I talked about it, I was like, girl, I'm so glad I asked that question. You know, and, like, from then on, you're like, what's the worst thing that could have happened if they'd already done that? They would have been like, Alyssa, we already did that. But in my head, I made it this huge, I will be the most foolish person that ever sat in the sit room, you know, and I asked this question, and it wasn't true. And so I always tell people, just like ask the question, because what's the worst thing that can happen, right?
Allow ourselves not to get in our own way, right?
Right, which I've done before.
I'm seeing that we've got 2 questions left. Is that right, Victoria? Okay, so we'll go right side, left side, and then I'll ask the closing.
I'll be quick with my answers.
So on the right first, my right. So how's left? Your left.
Hi, my name is Tara, and I'm a senior at Ohio State. I was just wondering what some of your biggest hurdles were working at the White House.
Hurdles?
Mm-hmm.
Hurdles. Probably myself, to be honest. You know, I mean, like, nobody ever doubted me more than I doubted me at times. And so, you know, even when I was, like, trying to talk people out of making me Deputy Chief of Staff, Pete Rouse, who was my boss in the Senate office and one of my, like, great mentors, he has this, like, real curmudgeon voice. He was like, Jesus Christ, what do you want me to beg you? And I was like, what? And he's like, nobody thinks, the only person who thinks you can't do this is you. So I would say I was the biggest hurdle.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
Hello, my name is Alex. I'm also a graduating senior at Ohio State in the Glenn School, actually. Something that you said really intrigued me, and that was the ability to separate government from politics. As somebody who really is interested in affecting social change, but is kind of, quite frankly, sickened by the idea of politics on a day-to-day basis, especially in this age of mass media, that is something that I struggle with every single day. And so I guess my question is, what would be your advice to somebody who is extremely interested in public service and social change, but is not interested in the political side of it at all? Like, what is the best direction to kind of take to be able to make the changes that I want to see in the world?
Whoa. So, here's what I would say. I would say that there are organizations, a lot of nonprofits, not necessarily think tanks, but like there are a lot of younger, sort of politically active without being political organizations out there. So depending on like what you're really interested in, that exist where you can go and you can be part of a campaign that is about the issue you care about without being overly political. Like interestingly enough, I've done a bunch of campaigns. I'm not a very political person. I don't, you know, we were talking about it earlier, and when I left to go work on the Obama campaign, the two people who threw my going away party were two women that worked for Hillary Clinton. And they were not happy to get rid of me. That's not why they threw me. But when I came back to Washington, we used to have a lunch every Tuesday, and as soon as I moved back to Washington, we have Chinese food once a month at our favorite restaurant, even to this day. And so there were ways for me to do what I wanted to do without it being grossly political and feeling like you're like burning the building down. And it's like, I totally know what you're talking about. But I would find the issue that's really interesting to you and find the groups that are most active in that issue and see how, and like follow them on Twitter, see how they act. Like some people are really aggressive and like kind of hate, like you follow them and they're like kind of hateful almost. It's like you just don't like their tactics. And wherever you go work, you should feel comfortable with the kind of tactics they use, because then you'll feel like you've like found your place. That's what I think.
Thank you.
You bet.
Sarah Mitchell's Communications Manager for Women's Fund of Central Ohio, right to your right if you want to talk to her too. So we're celebrating 9 years for the Barbara K. Fergus Lecture Series, and you are in a transition of your own after 9 years. So when we invite you back 9 years from today,
Yes.
what issues of women's leadership and politics do you think that we'll be talking about that you can reflect on?
Oh my God, I think we'll be talking about like which woman's going to be president, right? It's not going to be like, is there going to be a woman? It'll just be which woman, you know? And the thing that's like actually pretty interesting is that the Republicans had much better female candidates this time. And so I wish that everyone would, to make what I hope I see in the next 9 years possible, I think that everyone should go out and find a woman who's running that they really believe in and just like help in any way you can. Because I think that, for example, when we were putting together the issue for Marie Claire about 10 women to watch, I had not heard of 4 of them. That's crazy. Like, how had I not heard of 4 of these women who were so incredible? And so I think that like we need to take to Twitter, and I don't know if people still do Facebook. I don't have a Facebook page. But like, get those women's names out there. Make sure everybody knows who they are. There are so many ways to participate that are not, like politics makes everybody feel really gross right now, and I think that there are so many ways to participate with, and like kind of, I think if we invest more, it'll start feeling less gross. And so I hope in 9 years, it's like less gross, and it's not all about negative ads. I mean, in DC, I can't tell, I like couldn't watch the television anymore, and you like try to watch the DVR, and it's like, fast forwarding may be disabled. And it's like, well, I'm not gonna watch the show now, because they're like 10, you know, Ed Gillespie ads. But I hope that it's like, in 10 years, it's more civil, that it's more substantive, and it's not a question of like getting women to run, it's that there are so many, we don't even talk about it anymore.